Hi guys, welcome back to Reading the Bible in a Year. Today is Sunday, January 17th, day 17. Happy Sunday to each and every one of you that is watching me today. I appreciate you being here. I am grateful for those of you who have subscribed to the channel just to listen to little old me read the Bible. I appreciate you and I thank you. If you're watching this for the very first time, go on ahead and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to turn on the notification bell so that you're notified each and every time that I upload a video, which is pretty much every single day. All right, guys, so last we left off yesterday. We were going through the lineage of Esau. We didn't really talk much on subject matter. We were just going through his lineage of his children, his grandchildren, etc., etc. Basically his descendants. And I said just to make note of some of those names because they will be characters, those names will resurface later on in other scriptures as we continue to read. So that's basically what we did yesterday. Now, for today's reading, kind of a new subject line. We're picking up at Genesis 37, and we're going to talk about Joseph and Joseph's early years. So with that, let's get the ball rolling. I'm going to give you a little bit of a background into what we're going to be reading before we start reading the scriptures. Again, I am starting at Genesis 37, verse 1, and we are going to read all the way through to Genesis 38, verse 30. Okay? So following this basically genealogical account of Esau's family, the Genesis record focuses with greater detail upon Jacob and his descendants, for it is through the descendants of Jacob, now called Israel, remember he went through a name change, that the promised blessings are to come. Taking a leading role in the continuing saga is Israel's son Joseph. Israel's special fondness for Joseph and perhaps Joseph's own attitude lead to envy and hatred by Joseph's brothers. Their behavior towards Joseph and toward their own father is hardly worthy of the important positions they will later occupy as the heads of the tribes, which together form the nation of God's people. So let's begin with the reading of the scripture, Genesis 37, verse 1. Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. This is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Now, Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word of him. Joseph had a dream. When he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." His brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. "Listen," he said, "I had another dream, and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, "What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?" His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Now his brothers had gone to graze their father's flocks near Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, "As you know, your brothers are grazing the flocks near Shechem. Come, I am going to send you to them." "Very well," he replied. So he said to him, "Go and see if all is well with your brothers and with the flocks, and bring word back to me." Then he sent him off from the valley of Hebron. When Joseph arrived at Shechem, a man found him wandering around in the fields and asked him, "What are you looking for?" He replied, "I'm looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they are grazing their flocks?" "They have moved on from here," the man said. "I heard them say, 'Let's go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan. But they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. "Here comes that dreamer," they said to each other. "Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of those cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams." When Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. "Let's not take his life," he said. "Don't shed any blood. Throw him into the cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him." Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty. There was no water in it. As they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices, balm, myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." His brothers agreed. When Reuben returned to the cistern and saw that Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes. He went back to his brothers and said, "The boy isn't there. Where can I turn now?" Then they got Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, and dipped the robe in the blood. They took the ornate robe back to their father and said, "We found this. Examine it to see whether it is your son's robe." He recognized it and said, "It is my son's robe. Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. "No," he said, "I will continue to mourn until I join my son in the grave." So his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. So we're going to take a little break here. That was quite interesting. To think that back in those days, you were just able to easily sell someone like that is kind of hard to believe. It's weird, to be honest with you. But I guess that's how it was. I would imagine that, if you're able to just randomly sell someone, it would have to be like his parent or someone who has authority over him. But I never thought that his brothers could just sell him off like that. But I guess that's what it was. So we're going to do a little bit of reading here to let you know about what we're going to get into next. So we are going to talk about Judah and Tamar. Maybe I'm saying that wrong. Could be Tamar. Okay, so as Joseph becomes a slave in an Egyptian household, a most fascinating story is unfolding back in Canaan involving Judah. one of Israel's son by Leah. It concerns the ancient custom of estates, quite foreign to modern thinking, in which the brother of a deceased man having children marries the brother's wife so that the brother's lineage and property as well may continue through a proper line of succession. This grace comes when Onan, one of Judah's sons, goes through the sexual act with his brother's wife, Tamar, but purposely prevents any offspring from being born. There follows a rather curious story of Tamar, who resolves to bear a child by Judah himself. Whoa, that was a lot to take in. So I don't know about you, but I've heard over the years that in certain communities, in certain religion, that if a man dies, he's married, then his wife, who's now a widow, has to marry his brother. I guess that's kind of what's being said here. But in this case, Judah's son Onan slept with. This is like so confusing. Slept with his stepsister, is his sister-in-law. I'm guessing she was Tamar, and it's saying here purposely prevents any offspring from being born. So was that the first case of using the pull-out method? I don't know. Let's carry on. But we're at Genesis 38, verse 1. At that time, Judah left his brothers and went down to stay with a man of Adullam named Hira. There Judah met the daughter of a Canaanite man named Shua. He married her and made love to her. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son, who was named She conceived again and gave birth to a son, named him Onan. She gave birth to still another son and named him Shelah. It was at Kezib that she gave birth to him. Judah got a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death. Then Judah said to Onan, "Sleep with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law to raise up offspring for your brother." But Onan knew that the child would not be his. So whenever he slept with his brother's wife, he spilled his semen on the ground to keep from providing offspring for his brother. What he did was wicked in the Lord's sight. So the Lord put him to death also. Judah then said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, "Live as a widow in your father's household until my son Shelah grows up." For he thought, he may die too, just like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's household. After a long time, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died. When Judah had recovered from his grief, he went up to Timnah to the men who were shearing his sheep, and his friend Hira, the Adullamite, went with him. When Tamar was told, "Your father-in-law is on his way to Timnah to shear his sheep," she took off her widow's clothes, covered herself with a veil to disguise herself, and then sat down at the entrance to Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that though Shelah had not grown up, she had not been given to him, had now grown up, I should say, she had not been given to him as his wife. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. Not realizing that she was his daughter-in-law, he went over to her by the roadside and said, "Come now, let me sleep with you." "And what will you give me to sleep with you?" she asked. "I'll send you a young goat from my flock," he said. "Will you give me something as a pledge until you send it?" she asked. He said, "What pledge should I give you?" "Your seal and its cord and the staff in your hand," she answered. So he gave them to her and slept with her, and she became pregnant by him. After she left, she took off her veil and put on her widow's clothes again. Meanwhile, Judah sent the young goat by his friend, the Adullamite, in order to get his pledge back from the woman, but he did not find her. He asked the men who lived there, "Where is the shrine prostitute who was beside the road at Enaim?" "There hasn't been any shrine prostitutes here," they said. So he went back to Judah and said, "I didn't find her. Besides, the men who lived there said, there hasn't been any shrine prostitute here." Then Judah said, "Let her keep what she has, or we will become a laughingstock. After all, I did send her this young goat, but you didn't find her." About 3 months later, Judah was told, "Your daughter-in-law Tamar is guilty of prostitution, and as a result, she is now pregnant." Judah said, "Bring her out and have her burnt to death." As she was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law. "I am pregnant by the man who owns these," she said, and she added, "See if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are." Judah recognized them and said, "She is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her to my son Shelah." And he did not sleep with her again. When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. As she was giving birth, one of them put out his hand. So the midwife took a scarlet thread and tied it on his wrist and said, "This one came out first." But when he drew back his hand, his brother came out, and she said, "So this is how you've broken out?" And he was named Perez. Then his brother, who had the scarlet thread on his wrist, came out, and he was named Zerah. So that's where we're leaving off at Genesis 38, verse 30. So we're just going to read a little bit here about what we're going to get into for tomorrow. And just to recap what we just read, this is not scripture, you guys. So the most important aspect of this seemingly insignificant story will come to the light only after many centuries have passed. At that time, it will become evident that a descendant of Judah, through Perez, will become God's messenger to all mankind, the Messiah. So, interesting reading. I mean, like, wow. She pretended to be a prostitute, slept with her father-in-law. I mean, escaped death. Was that blackmail when she said, like, I'm pregnant by the man who owns these? Like, and he recognized it as his own? What was going on there? I mean, like, just completely crazy stuff. Absolute crazy stuff. But let me know what you think about everything that we just read for today. Would love to hear from you, your thoughts and opinion. Again, thank you so much for joining me today, Sunday, January 17th, for another wonderful day of reading the Bible in a year. We will be back tomorrow, January 18th, continuing on with this story, still talking about Joseph. And again, thank you so much for joining me today, and stay blessed. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.